I would talk about situations less than war. Look, I mean, in many ways, what has happened over the um, over the borders for several years now, we've had several incidents. Um, there is the the line of actual control, border, whatever term we want to use. I don't want to use it in a legalistic sense, but just the line that divides China and India, whether it is acceptable to India or not acceptable to India or China, etc., etc. That's an important issue, but let's put it aside now. So something very similar seems to be happening in the South China Sea itself. Uh, China has steadily pushed its claims um, to the invention of the old nine dash line, which was hardly ever talked about even 15 years ago or 18 years ago. Now suddenly from there they've gone to the baselines to the for the four Shah, the four sands or the four islands, and claiming a whole lot of territory for themselves, both exclusive economic zone, etc., etc. So in this context, I think it's important to understand, what is the purpose of what the Americans are doing in terms of what they call the, FONOPs, freedom of navigation operations. So in some ways, freedom of navigation operations is very closely linked to very, very literal, fundamental implementation and interpretation of the United Nations Convention of the Laws of the Sea. What does that mean? What do Americans mean by FONOPs? By FONOPs, they mean that we do not recognize false claims by China in South China. So incidentally, Americans do FONOPs against several nations, and there are some aspects of India's Maritime Zones of India Act of 1976, also which they sort of have a difference of opinion, and therefore they have carried out FONOPs against their allies like Australia and Philippines. But with China, they have been very steady, and especially in the last 2 or 3 years of, I would say, the Trump administration, they have got very serious about it. Now, in FONOPs, through FONOPs, what they're telling China is that we don't recognize many of the things that you claim as your territory. Therefore, you have no territorial water claims, and you have no right to national airspace over these islands or reefs that you're building, that you're claiming. And what can other navies do today? Just like we object to China's creeping claims in along the Himalayas, it's supposed sovereignty issues with Arunachal Pradesh, etc. We need to ramp up along with all other Quad partners on what we need to do in terms of freedom of navigation operations. And in this, even ASEAN navies, I do not know exactly what all each navy is doing or not doing. I do not even know what the Indian Navy's position on this is. But in a generic sense, if we in a sense get under China's skin in the South China Sea and East China Sea, and bolster the positions of our friends in ASEAN, Japan, Philippines, all the countries there. And since even at the prime ministerial level, we've talked a lot about our support and our complete agreement with rules-based orders, international orders, and like you mentioned, you study the global commons. So the freedom of navigation all along the seas. So what we need to do perhaps is to do a greater FONOPS. Now that specifically means something for each navy that does it. And how do I put it that way? Uh, let us say now this can turn the other way around. Suppose a ship goes through uh, within 12 nautical miles, that's territorial waters or whatever China claims, and sails through. China will challenge. In fact, they tend to challenge all navies transiting through South China Sea to reiterate that, and that's a very clever tactic and perhaps a long-term strategy that they follow. Let us say, suppose a ship says that I don't recognize this, and then answers that according to UNCLOS I'm on innocent passage. Now that would be an incorrect thing to say, because innocent passage gives navies the right to go through somebody else's territorial waters, passing innocently, which means they will not stop, they will not do any military activity, they will not fly their helicopters or aircraft, they will say not lower their boats and do some exercises, even like man overboard exercises. So if any country that responds to a Chinese challenge by saying I'm exercising my right to innocent passage, actually reiterates perhaps unwittingly, China's claim to that territory. Um, what what needs to be done is perhaps what the Americans mode is followed to say that we are doing this because we don't recognize it. Now, will this be without some reaction from them? No, but you know anybody in this audience would know that China reacts to almost everything that people say or don't say. So this would be yet another thing. And I think we need to join up with other navies in a coalitional way to have a certain compatibility of positions in terms of freedom of navigations, because I think impact, the long-term impact of China being allowed to continue with its claims is very harmful at a time when, as I mentioned in the paper, they are strengthening themselves with the factors of time, space, force, and to use, John Boyd's other factor of mind itself, time, space, force, mind, to work on international impressions, which I think we need to think about a little differently, perhaps, from what we have. As I said, I do not know what, say, the Indian Navy's position is or what the Australian Navy's position is as far as FONOPS goes for these. I'm just using two examples. But I think there needs to be a greater coherence. And that's where the leverage of Seapower